You are listening to the Performance Anxiety Podcast on the Pantheon Podcast Network. I am your host, Mark. And with two notes, James Calvin Wilsey announced his presence to the music world at large. But by the time Wicked Game launched Chris Isaak, Rowland Sally, Kenney Dale Johnson, and James Calvin Wilsey onto MTV and in front of millions, Jimmy was already living a very rock and roll lifestyle, one that would lead him to crash and burn half an album later. Journalist and author Michael Goldberg joins the podcast to discuss James Wilsey and the new book he's written about his life, death, and the music he left behind. It may be the most heartbreaking episode I've ever recorded. Michael discusses Jimmy's early days in school and how he started playing with the Avengers in San Francisco, meeting Chris Isaak and deciding he didn't really want to play with him initially. We also talk about his time as a consultant for Apple and in IT for a Hollywood marketing company. But even through his addiction to heroin, Jimmy was always working on music. In addition to the solo album he released, El Dorado, there was so much more, including music with Billy Idol and Lana Del Rey. It's a heartbreaking and fascinating story. So pick up Michael's book, Wicked Game, the true story of guitarist James Calvin Wilsey from Hozak Books. A percentage of the sales will go to help Jimmy's son, Waylon. There's a link in the notes, and you can follow Michael on social media to see what he's up to. Follow us at PerformanceANX on social media. Buy stuff at performanceanx.threadless.com. Or buy us a cup of coffee at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. And get some tissues and check out the story of James Calvin Wilsey with Michael Goldberg on Performance Anxiety, part of Pantheon Podcasts.
So, I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm a journalist, a novelist, and a photographer. I've been interviewing musicians and photographing musicians since I was 17. I wrote for Esquire, the New Musical Express, Cream, Downbeat, New York Rocker, Trouser Press, musician. I mean, a lot of different places. And I was a senior writer at Rolling Stone for a decade. I founded the first rock internet magazine, Addicted to Noise. And let's see, what else can I tell you? This book is called Wicked Game, the true story of guitarist James Calvin Wilsey. And at the end of the year, I have a collection of my writing coming out, Addicted to Noise, the music writings of Michael Goldberg. And it's been really great to be on Performance Anxiety, or I'm just so happy. I should try that again. I'm really happy that I've been invited to be on Performance Anxiety. And I think we're going to have a good show. I'm really looking forward to telling your listeners all about, Jimmy Wilsey and why he was important and why I wrote a book about him.
This is really, it's fascinating to me because when I first started thinking about doing this podcast, the subject of your book is James Calvin Wilsey, and he was one of the people that I wanted to get on the podcast. And I'm trying to remember if I had found out he had just passed or he passed very soon after I started. And I figured there went my chance. So having somebody who knew him and has written a book about him is the next best thing. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, sure. No, thanks for having me. This is great.
So before we get into the subject of the book, let's find out a little bit about you. How did you become a writer? Did you play music growing up, or was music just something that was a hobby?
Well, actually, I mean, I did take piano lessons and guitar lessons. The thing was, after the Beatles hit, everybody wanted to learn to play guitar, including me. And the thing is, everyone wanted to learn to play electric guitar. Right. But my parents would only get me an acoustic guitar. And so I'm taking these acoustic guitar lessons. I'm learning, folk songs. Right. And as a young teenager, like 12 years old, folk song. I mean, now, of course, folk music is I think there's a lot of folk music that I really appreciate and like. Yeah. But as a 12-year-old, that was not where I was at. I wanted to play the Beatles and the Kinks and the Rolling Stones and all of that. Oh yeah. On an electric guitar, and so that was problematic. But anyway, in terms of writing, I was always a good writer in school, and I also loved to read, and so. When Rolling Stone started, I bought probably the second issue, and pretty quick, it was like, this is what I want to do, And so, I was reading Rolling Stone but I mean, when I was 17, a friend and I, this was during the summer, and we thought it was going to be a Bay Area rock magazine that was going to go on and on forever.
Yeah.
But we did one issue of it. We called it Hard Road, which was based on an album by John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. But it was also the idea that the musician's life, it's a hard road, that they're on. And, and so we did one issue. And the thing was, we were friends with this guy, Tom Donahue Jr. And Tom Donahue Sr. was the guy who created underground FM rock music in the Bay Area at KMPX back in 67. And so this was our friend's dad. So we're going to do this magazine, and we're walking up. We parked the car. I parked my car. We got out. We're 17. We walk up the road, and at the top of the driveway leading down to Tom Donahue's house is Jerry Garcia.
Whoa.
And I go up to Jerry Garcia and I say, "Hey, we're starting this magazine. We'd like to interview you." Something, I mean, I don't know my exact words, but basically that was the gist of it. And amazingly, he says, "Sure."
Wow.
And we say, "Well, so, can we do it? We don't have our tape recorder, we want to," and he gives us his address and says, "Yeah, come to my place next, Tuesday night at 7 or something, and And so we go there and we knock on the door, and Mountain Girl answers.
Oh my gosh.
And she says, "Hello, what is that?
Yeah.
And we say, "Well, Jerry Garcia told us to come here at this time to interview him." And literally, I'm carrying a reel-to-reel tape recorder that's like,
whoa,
whatever, like 24 inches wide and 24 inches high. And, and then we've got a microphone we're carrying, and our notebooks. And so we're standing there and I have my camera and all this stuff. And she says, "Well, let me check to him, but I know he's about to leave to go play the Keystone Berkeley."
Oh,
and
man.
We're like, "Oh my God." And so anyway, he was about to leave, but because he'd completely forgotten about this. I mean, it's not like this was on the top of his mind.
Yeah.
For us, this was like amazing. Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead, is actually going to do an interview with us. We've got our cover. This is amazing.
I know the feeling.
So anyway, he sat down with us in his living room. We got the thing rolling. I took some pictures, and that was our cover story.
Oh my!
of our one and only issue, because we're 17, and by the time it came out, and we took it around to newsstands everywhere and tried to get places to carry it, and I mean, you can't believe how much work it was. And then the school year was going to start, and there's no way we could do another issue.
Right.
So, but anyway, so that was kind of one of the key things early on that I did that prepared me to be a real journalist.
That's amazing. What a first issue, first and only issue, though. Jeez.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Man, you still have copies of that?
So, oh yeah, I do.
Oh, good.
I have one somewhere here, but I don't. I've had one around. I don't know. I don't have it to show you right now, but I have copies.
That is awesome.
But I was the arts editor of the high school paper, and then I wrote rock journalism for the City on a Hill Press when I went to UC Santa Cruz, and then there was an alternative weekly in the town of Santa Cruz, and so I became their rock critic and wrote a column for them.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships or at work, not dealing well with the stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Try doing that in person. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And a special offer to Performance Anxiety listeners, you can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/performanceanxiety. That's betterhelp.com/performanceanxiety. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
After college, I was in San Francisco and I got a job working as a copy boy at the San Francisco Chronicle. And that was really useful because they still have it. It's called the San Francisco Chronicle Datebook section. It's a Sunday entertainment section.
Okay.
And so I started writing articles for the Datebook section.
Oh, cool.
Interviews with musicians. And the thing was, they paid $35. So they were paying, and that was still nothing. Even back then, it was nothing. Okay. So the thing was, they were hungry for stories, which was great for me.
Okay.
Because I was getting a salary from the Chronicle. So I didn't care if they were paying me $35 for these freelance articles, but the thing was, the paper had a reach of like they said 2 million people.
Wow.
So you could get basically any artist you wanted, you could talk to. And so it was great. Smokey Robinson,
Wow.
I'm trying to remember just so many people, Muddy Waters.
Oh man.
It was just like all kinds of people. The Go-Go's when they had their hit, and
cool.
the B-52s, and so then, because I had all these articles in the Chronicle, then I was able to use that and get the attention of Rolling Stone. And anyway, eventually I got hired as a senior writer at Rolling Stone, and then I did that for 10 years. And that was pretty amazing. I did like cover story on James Brown. I did a story on Lindsey Buckingham, cover story on Stevie Wonder. I did a big story on Brian Wilson when he was under the spell of that strange therapist, Landy.
Yes.
Big story when Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys died, about the, sort of what happened.
Wow.
I was kind of doing more investigative kinds of pieces.
Oh, cool.
So I would talk to a lot of people. I did a cover story on Boy George when I don't know if you remember, Boy George became, was using heroin.
Yeah.
And, he really went on a big slide. And so I went to England and, to get the sort of the inside story on what had happened to Boy George and how had this all happened. And,
oh man.
And I'm trying to remember, did a big story, sort of what I called post-punk, but it was really continuation of punk. It's the first like serious story that dealt with Black Flag and the Replacements.
Oh, cool.
And Flipper and Husker Du. And the Minutemen. That was in Rolling Stone.
Wow.
So that was kind of a big deal for the, to get for that scene to get that kind of mainstream attention.
For sure.
And I wrote about Van Morrison, interviewed him, and X, and lots of people. For 10 years I did four Michael Jackson cover stories.
Oh wow.
I never got to interview him. I did get to meet him once. But
oh man!
But I went up to Neverland. I stayed up at Neverland for a night.
Oh, and jeez.
Yeah, it's like a lot of like crazy stuff. And so anyway, then by 1993, the internet started.
Yeah.
And I got this idea for an online music magazine.
Okay.
And there was no such thing. I mean, this was the beginning of the internet.
Yeah.
And so, I was initially going to do this on AOL. And I actually there was a guy at Warner Brothers who he thought this was a great idea. So we were having meetings with people at Warner Brothers. The idea there was they were going to fund this thing.
Okay.
Well, a year goes by and they're still not funding it. And now it's 1994, and there still wasn't any web music magazine.
Okay.
1994. There's no web music magazine. Hardly anybody has the internet at that point.
Right. Yeah.
And so I said, okay, this isn't going to be on AOL. We're going to do this on the internet. And I met these guys who were in Santa Cruz who were doing some music stuff on the internet. And I said, hey, do you guys want to do the back end of this? And I'm going to be the editor. I'm going to get all the writers. We're going to get, all these great people to write for it. You need to handle the tech stuff. So they were game for that. And so on December 1st, 1995, we launched the first issue of Addicted to Noise.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And this was the second web magazine. The first one beat us by literally about a month.
Oh.
And it was hot wired. It was the online version of Wired magazine.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel so bad about that because Wired magazine was great.
Yeah.
And I had written for Wired, so it was cool. But so we launched this thing, and the second issue of it, I had REM as the cover story, and I went to Australia where they were beginning the tour for their album Monster.
Mm-hmm.
And the first dates were in Perth. And Perth is this really out of the way place in Australia. I mean, really nobody goes to Perth, as far as that's what I'm told anyway.
Right.
Well, I wanted to go to Perth to be able to be at the very beginning of the tour, but they didn't want me to go there because they wanted to start their tour with no press, watching. So, but they said it was fine for me to go to Sydney, which was basically their second group of dates. There were 3 nights in Sydney.
Okay.
And so that's what I did. And so I interviewed Michael Stipe in the afternoon, and then went to a couple of the shows, which were great, and interviewed their producer, Scott Litt. And so put this big REM package together. And the thing was, this is like the beginning of online journalism. And so as a journalist, I'm looking at this this is amazing. You don't have to worry about space.
Right.
You can just go on and on. You can run, a 10,000 word interview and it's cool, no problem. So, that was how we started. But the funny thing was that, or I don't know if it's funny, but it wasn't the long features. It wasn't the columns, even though I got Dave Marsh and we were reprinting Greil Marcus's column, and Billy Altman was writing a TV column, and Richard Meltzer, and I had all these good rock critics doing the columns, and then I had a lot of people doing reviews. Mm-hmm. But the thing that immediately started catching on was our daily music news, which we called Music News of the World, as sort of a joke on those the tabloids, and. So that just exploded. And so basically we ended up putting a lot of focus on the daily music news because people were really hungry all over the world. People were hungry to have new information every single day about their favorite artists.
Yeah.
And so we were covering, we were covering all a big broad range of artists, from Patti Smith to Fish to REM to the Minutemen to Iggy to just a wide range, but it wasn't lame pop music. It was cool rock music, and and some blues and soul, and but primarily at that point it was rock music, and underground rock music and mainstream rock music.
Okay.
So that's that was the whole thing.
Oh, that is wild, man.
And then eventually, the thing is, it was really hard to make money, and I got record companies to advertise. And the thing was, I was having to do everything. I mean, I was having to edit the magazine. I was having to get the ads, and I had other people helping me, but I couldn't find, I tried different people trying to get them to be able to sell ads, and they couldn't do it. And so I was running out of money, basically. and so and I was going into debt. I was like using, this thing where you could get a lot of credit cards. Well, I had a lot of credit cards, and it was getting scary, actually.
Oh no!
And so luckily, there was another music website by that point. It was called SonicNet.
Okay. And
SonicNet was based in New York, and this guy named Nicholas Butterworth was running it. And so I read in the paper that this company had bought SonicNet, and so that was in the Wall Street Journal. And so this friend of mine, not friend of mine, but at that point, this guy who was actually David Hyman, who was actually able to sell ads for us, he was going to New York. So I said, David, meet with Nicholas, find out, maybe they want to buy us too, and we can combine.
Yeah.
And so that's actually what happened.
Oh,
and
wow.
So then we combined SonicNet and Addicted to Noise, and we were under the umbrella of this other company that had some money. So basically, we were then, for the next 6 years, I guess. I mean, let's see, how long did it go till? Basically till 2000.
Okay.
I had started Addicted to Noise at the end of '94. So there were years when we just had all this money. So basically, at a certain point, my editorial staff was 75 people. That's
wow.
That's more people than Rolling Stone or any other music magazine ever had. I mean,
wow.
It was huge. We had people doing because we were doing audio clips with the stories, sometimes video clips. It was just a wild thing. And
that's crazy.
Yeah. So I had a really wild ride during those early internet years.
Man. So you've written a book about a guitarist who's just a mystery to so many people, myself included. And I've loved his work, and I've always wondered what happened to him. James Calvin Wilsey, Chris Isaak's original guitarist. How did you meet him in the first place?
Well, the thing was, I was doing a story for the San Francisco Examiner. This is in 1982. This is before Rolling Stone.
Okay.
And so then the story was going to be on rising bands, new and rising bands in the Bay, really in San Francisco.
Okay.
And so I'm asking, everyone I know, what are the best? Who do you think is best? Who are the new ones that are really good?
Yeah.
And one of the bands was called Silvertone.
Okay.
And so I went to see them at this club called the Berkeley Square in Berkeley, and they were absolutely fantastic. I mean, they were sort of like Ricky Nelson meets the Everly Brothers meets, I don't know, Elvis or something. I mean, it was, or with the Shadows, backing them or something.
Right.
I mean, and the thing was, for some of the songs, Jimmy and Isaac were singing together at times.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, he was like doing some harmony vocal stuff, stepping up to the mic to do that.
Oh, wow.
And I just thought they were great. And the thing was, their co-manager and producer was Eric Jacobson.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric Jacobson, for people who don't know, in the mid 60s, he produced 6 top 10 hits for the Lovin' Spoonful.
Yeah.
Do You Believe in Magic and Summer in the City? And I mean, just fantastic songs.
Yeah.
And, I was like a young kid, at the younger end of teenage when those songs came out, and I just flipped over those songs. And I bought all the Loving Spoonfuls albums. And so the fact that Eric Jacobson was working with this new band was very exciting to me.
Oh, yeah.
And so I met Eric and we talked, and then he took me backstage and introduced me to the band, including Jimmy. Okay. And so that was the first time the first time that I met him. And then over the next number of years, as they were developing and, playing occasional gigs, eventually, when their first album came out in 1985, I did a story it was basically about Chris Isaak for Rolling Stone. It was a short piece, but I went to a bunch of gigs at that time, and they were like way better even than the first time I saw them, because they had a new drummer, they had Kenney on the drums at that point, they had Raleigh on the bass, and in addition to Chris and Jimmy, and they were really, really great. And I saw them at this small club called the Night Break that was on Haight Street, and they did a residency there.
Oh,
they played a bunch of nights, and I went to a number of those, and it was fantastic. And so I would then I would go to gigs, and I was kind of getting to know the guys, just a little bit, and then I would, when a new album would come out, like when the second album came out. Blue Hotel, on a lonely highway. Blue Hotel. Love don't work out my way. I wait alone each lonely night. Blue Hotel. Blue Hotel. I interviewed Chris again. At that point, I did a big story for the San Francisco Examiner, had a magazine section, so I did a big story on Chris Isaak for that, and but I hung with the band and went to Stockton and interviewed his mother, and went to the house where he grew up and met his dad, and interviewed Eric Jacobson at length, and the other co-manager Mark Plummer, and then at a certain point, 1987, I interviewed Jimmy for probably an hour and a half, and that was the first time where we really sort of sat down together, and I went to his apartment, and we hung out a bit. He played me some records. And we did this interview. And then when Wicked Game happened, I did a big story. It was sort of a cover story in the sense that, it was a cover story, but the cover was shared by 4 artists.
Okay.
So Chris Isaak was one of the 4 on the cover.
Okay.
So that was a substantial piece. The longest piece I had written on them, other than the one for the Chronicle, and so I interviewed Jimmy for that as well, and then I did a profile of Jimmy for Guitar Player magazine.
Oh, cool!
It was just on Jimmy, and I think he really dug that.
That's awesome. Yeah,
and it was cool. It was a cool piece, and the photography for it was great. It was really nice, and.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Hey guys, I want to talk to you about socks for a second. Why not? It's a music podcast. But I tried a pair of socks from Boldfoot and loved them. I've only worn them once because my kids have stolen them. So in my household, that's the best endorsement I can give. And I guess it's fitting because the design I chose was Jailbird. The design I chose was Jailbird. I might keep that in. The socks are 100% American made, and 5% of all proceeds go to veteran charities. It makes sense, seeing that Boldfoot is a family and veteran-owned company. They have a huge variety of styles. So check out boldfoot.com and buy some of the best socks you've ever slapped on your feet. And help veterans while you're at it. That's boldfoot.com.
And anyway, we started hanging out. And so we became friends. And I would go over to his place, and he had all these, he taped all these Rolling Stones, like movies, and he had all these, back then, it wasn't like now,
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, VHS tape and, but he had all this. And so we would sometimes just hang out and watch the Stones or talk about stuff, or he would show me what he was doing, because he was using this pioneering multi-track recording program that you could do 4 tracks on your computer. And this was the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
There was no Pro Tools, didn't exist yet. These were the guys who created the audio recording part of Pro Tools.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. But this was the beginning, and it was called DECK, DECK, and it was 4 tracks. And so Jimmy was using that, and he actually recorded, one song he recorded on that was on a film soundtrack.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then he used that to record. A lot of times he would work out guitar parts that he would then later do in the real studio.
Okay.
But that's where he could work it out, and he could, do multi-tracks and then merge things together and all of that. And also during that time, and this sort of is the side of Jimmy he was a really, at that point in his life anyway, he was a really gracious person who would do a lot for his friends. And here he was, this record had been in the top 10, Wicked Game. He's given my son guitar lessons every week.
Wow.
We'd go over there and he would show him how to play, a song that he wanted to play.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, he was just like that. At that point in his life, later things got different, but so anyway, so that's kind of how I got to know him.
Okay. He's known best for Wicked Game. Those 2 notes, anybody hears those notes, they know that song. And
absolutely.
That song is iconic. It kind of defines Chris Isaak. But I know he was in a punk band before Silvertone, the Avengers, but he played bass in that band, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, no, he played bass in the Avengers, and the thing is, okay, this is also this is crazy. So Jimmy he played guitar in high school, and that's when he'd gotten an electric guitar. And first he played acoustic, then he got electric. He was, and he was playing in bands but they weren't really bands. They were more just like him and his friends would get together. There was a drummer and there was another guitar player, and they would get together in his basement and they would play.
Okay.
And there were other people he played with, but he was never in bands that performed anywhere in high school.
Okay.
But he played a lot. And he was learning how to play, songs he liked. He learned tons of Neil Young songs when Harvest came out, because they loved that album. And the Stones, he was a big Stones fan, so he's learning some Stones stuff and all that. But anyway, when he got to be 18, he had decided he was going to go to San Francisco, and he'd go to art school in San Francisco.
Okay.
Because he was also an artist. And he was seriously doing art at that point, and he was actually doing art. He was doing music too, but he thought he was going to be an artist. That's what he thought he was going to do at that particular time when he was back in this suburb of St. Louis where he lived.
Right.
And so he came out here, and he got out here in August of 1996. I'm sorry, 1976.
Right.
And in December of 1976, the Mabue Gardens, the first punk club in San Francisco, started, and they had this band called the Nuns that were a punk band in San Francisco who played. And then at the beginning of 77, they had this band called Crime. And then at a certain point, the Ramones came out here and played there. And I mean, the Dictators, I think, played there. But there were a lot of bands forming really quickly in San Francisco around then that were playing this place. So Jimmy was here. He was here from the very beginning of the Mabue Gardens. And he started going there practically every night, if not every night.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, so at a certain point, I mean, he saw the Avengers and he was there with his girlfriend and he told his girlfriend, I could do that, pointing to the bass player. I could do it. I could play better than that guy. And he didn't play bass at that point. I mean, he played guitar, he didn't play bass, but that was sort of his attitude. So he ran into, he'd seen Penelope Houston. She was around the city. I mean, people's paths were crossing, and it was a small crowd, really, few hundred people who were the punk scene in the beginning.
Oh, wow.
It was a very small group of people.
Yeah.
And for the San Francisco punk scene. And anyway, he ran into her at City Lights Books, was the late Lawrence Ferlin Getty, who was a beat poet.
Yeah.
That was his bookstore, which is in North Beach.
Right.
That bookstore is like down the block from the Mabue Gardens. Okay. He runs into Penelope Houston there, and he says, "Hey, could I play guitar in your band?" And she says, "No, but we could really use a new bass player," because they were unhappy with Jonathan Postal, who was playing bass at the time. And now the Avengers have only played for like a month at this point.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. And so basically she says to him, well, talk to the guitar player, talk to Greg, we could use a bass player. Can you play bass? And he says, oh yeah, I could play bass. And so he talks to Greg at the Mabue. Everyone is at the Mabue every night.
Right. Right.
And so Greg says to him, he says, well, have you played bass before? And he says, no. He says, well, do you have a bass? No. He says, well, okay. But Greg said, well, there was something about this guy. It was like, you didn't care if he could play bass because he was such a great personality. I mean, there was something about this guy that he says, I could just see him in our band. I mean, and so,
wow.
So he says, okay, well, come, this is where we're rehearsing. Come here. And Jimmy said, he'd have a bass. He said, he would have a bass when he showed up. So, so he shows up. Okay. He shows up and he's got a bass. And he says to Greg, he says, you know what? I stopped at this pawn shop on my way here and they had this bass. And so I got it for $75. I mean, it was like, God. He was so casual. I mean,
my way here.
And so they had an amp that he could use, and they kind of auditioned him and played songs, and basically Greg said he was just perfect. Wow. I mean, he could just. And the thing was, he'd played guitar. He'd played guitar for years now, so I don't think it's actually that hard if you've played guitar to play bass. I mean, I'm sure that a dedicated bass player, someone in a major band, is going to have abilities and skills and things that Jimmy wouldn't have had back then.
Right.
But this is a raw punk band. This is the Avengers.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they brought him in, and that was it. He was the bass player in the Avengers till the band broke up. And he co-wrote actually what people think of as their best and most well-known song. It's a song called "We Are the One."
Yes.
And Jimmy wrote, at the minimum, he wrote the verses, and he made not the lyrics, the music.
Right.
We are the leaders of tomorrow. We are the
may have. It's unclear whether he wrote the chorus or if Greg, the guitar player, wrote the chorus. Greg sort of remembers writing the chorus. Jimmy told this other interviewer that he'd written the music, but I mean, he told him that in 2018, 6 months before he died. So he could have been elaborating a little bit on what actually happened. But Penelope has a notebook that she kept from back then, and it basically has, in terms of who wrote that particular song, it has her name and it has Jimmy's name, and then added in later is Danny, who was the drummer. So she told me that she thought that meant that Danny may have added like a little bit of some lyrics or something later, but that she wrote almost all the lyrics, and she thought Jimmy had written the music. It doesn't matter whether if Greg wrote it. Greg was and is an absolutely incredible guitar player. Yeah, I mean, you listen to him playing, on the Avengers songs back then, and he was just like one of the best. Yeah, I mean, it was just amazing. So I wouldn't be surprised, if he wrote the chorus. That's completely believable. It doesn't matter. But anyway, so Jimmy was in that band, and he became kind of a star within the San Francisco punk scene. He was one of the people who was at the heart of it. And the thing was that he was at the Mabue, like I told you, almost every night. Yeah. And even though he's in this band that is now becoming very successful within the punk scene, I mean, 300-400 people are showing up a night, packing this club. Wow. When the Avengers go there. He was always helping other bands. I mean, Steve DePace, who became the drummer in Flipper. Mm-hmm. Well, Steve DePace goes up to him, and he's not in Flipper. He's not in any band. And he talked to him, and he said, "Well, how do you get in a band?" And Jimmy says, "Look, what you want to do is you want to go to this record store. It's called Aquarius Records. You want to go to Aquarius Records. You want to write down, what kind of music you like, to play, and that you're looking for a band, and you post that there. And, that's where people are going and looking to see if they need to find a musician. Go there." And that's what happened. I mean, he went there, and next thing he knows, he gets a call. And so that's how, and so that's the kind of, but like I say, that's how Jimmy was just a really nice guy. Yeah. He didn't have a bunch of airs like, oh, hey, I'm too good for you back then.
The Avengers break up, and Silvertone. What is the time frame? And it's such a sonic shift, such a change from the punk of the Avengers to the more, and I'm going off of what the very first Silvertone album, the more rockabilly sound of Silvertone.
Well, here's the thing. Jimmy was always into country music. And that was partially because his parents dug country music. And so there was country records playing in his house. He could play Johnny Cash songs. And that was something that he always liked. And so the Avengers actually, God, I'm spacing out now on the song that they did, but they played basically a rockabilly song. They did it in a punk way, but I think it was "Come On Everybody." I think that's the one it was. Yeah, they covered Eddie Cochran's "Come On Everybody."
Oh, okay.
The Avengers did. Billy Zoom from X, and Billy was all into he was all into Eddie Cochran, and he was showing him all these riffs and stuff, and so Jimmy started like he got into rockabilly. Okay. While the Avengers was still going on, he got into rockabilly, and meanwhile he was feeling like he was kind of burning out on the whole punk thing. It was kind of getting old for him.
Okay.
And so when the band broke up, it wasn't like he was like, oh, I want to do another punk band. And the other thing was he wanted to play guitar. I mean, even he was playing bass in the Avengers, but he always wanted to play guitar. And he always was playing guitar. I mean, on his own, he was practicing guitar, learning riffs, learning songs, and all that. And when the Avengers broke up, and this was in 1979, he wasn't sure he was going to continue in music.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know what he thought he was going to do. I mean, he was doing construction, and he hated the construction.
Yeah.
And he hated that. And so then he decided, okay, I'm going to do some stuff in music. And so I think he was like maybe giving people some guitar lessons. He was just, whatever was sort of coming along. He played bass for Lenny Kaye when Lenny Kaye came to town.
Okay.
He did 2 gigs and Jimmy played bass. And so then what happened was originally when Chris Isaak formed the first version of Silvertone, which was at the beginning of 1980, what happened was he was sort of coming up here, and this guy, Mark Plummer, who was a journalist who was kind of wanted to manage bands, and he'd been working with some bands in San Francisco, and someone played this tape at a party, and it was Chris Isaak singing a George Jones song, and it was a really terrible tape and everything. But he heard this voice, and he thought, "Wow, if I want to work with that guy."
Wow.
But he couldn't find him. All he knew was the girl who had the tape told him the guy's name was Chris, and he was from Stockton.
Oh, nice.
So anyway, some time goes by, and he runs into this guitar player that he casually knows, and he says to the guy, "What are you doing?" He says, I'm working with this guy, Chris. And he says, "Where's he from?" "Stockton." He says, "It's got to be the same guy. Give me his phone number."
Oh,
so
wow.
he calls, according to Mark, he calls Chris Isaak up and says, "Hey, I want to manage you. Do you have a manager? I want to manage you." And Isaak says, "Well, what are you going to do for me?" And he says to him, "I'm going to make you a star." And then they both start laughing, because that's the cliche, right?
Right.
And so the sense of humor clicked. And so anyway, he did start managing Chris Isaak.
Wow.
And so the first thing they needed to do was get a band together. And so he asked Chris, "Well, who do you like?" And he liked John Silver's drumming.
Okay.
And he liked Jimmy Wilsey's bass playing. And so they basically, first Mark Plummer had Silvers and Isaak over for dinner at his place, and those guys hit it off.
Okay.
And Jimmy did not want to play bass. That was just, no, I'm not doing, I don't want to do it. Sorry, man. So then they got this other bass player, Chuck Cornelis. And so it was a trio at first.
Okay.
And it was called the Silvertones for about 2 or 3 gigs. But, there's the Swan Silvertones. And so then they changed it to Silvertone.
Okay.
Well, at a certain point, they got an Echoplex, which is a unit that they used, like Sun Records used and stuff, to get echo on a voice or on a guitar.
Yeah.
And so they needed somebody to run the Echoplex and do sound. And anyway, John Silvers called up Jimmy and asked him if he wanted to do it. And Jimmy said, sure. And so Jimmy started doing the sound for Silvertone.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
And so then before and after the gig, he would show Chris Isaak guitar riffs, because Chris Isaak was not a very good guitar player, and he certainly wasn't a good lead guitar player.
Right.
And he's trying to play rhythm and lead, doing these rockabilly songs.
Oh,
and Jimmy knows how to play all the riffs for those things. So anyway, and they both bonded over that and over country music. And so they started getting together on a regular basis. And then meanwhile, Isaak got sick of his rockabilly band. And so he broke up that band.
Oh,
and so then him and Jimmy were working together. And then the two of them, according to Jimmy and according to other people, the two of them formed the second version of Silvertone. And Jimmy found the bass player, a guy named Jamie Ayres, and the way he found him was really funny. Jimmy got a cab, and he got in the cab and he's driving. Guy's got the radio on, and they start talking about music. And at some point, Jimmy says to him, "Do you play music?" And the guy says, "Yeah. What do you play?" "I play a stand-up bass." And Jimmy goes, "Oh, we're interested in you." And the guy says, "We?" And he says, "Yeah, it's this guy, Chris Isaak, and me, and you want to come, do an audition." So that's how they got the bass player.
Wow.
And then they brought John Silvers back to play drums, and they asked Danny Furious, who was the drummer in the Avengers, if he would play drums, but he at that point he was a drug addict at that point, and he was just totally consumed with that. He got clean, and he's no longer and he lives over in Sweden, and and I think he's a chef in Sweden, and he's totally clean. Yeah,
that is
he
awesome.
managed to, which is great, which is a really great thing, and he's a great guy. Anyway, but so that's how Jimmy got into Silvertone.
Okay,
and it was actually a very natural thing, because see, at the same time that punk was happening, and you think about the Clash, because the Clash is London Calling album and then Sandinista, both of those albums. I mean, there's some rockabilly on there.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of, it's, there's reggae, there's rockabilly, and that was the scene. The punk scene included, people were listening to like 50s music. They were listening to reggae music. That was part of the thing. What they were down on was all these big bloated, the Led Zeppelins and the Rolling Stones and, all of that stuff. They didn't want to have anything to do with. In theory, anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So they start playing in the early 80s. Jimmy is in the band for the first 4 albums, including Heart-Shaped World, which, like we mentioned earlier, has Wicked Game, the song that just exploded Chris Isaak's career. And he lasted one more album after that, for San Francisco Days.
Well, he played on half of that album.
Okay.
He's only on half of it.
Okay.
And the last song he played on was this song, Can't Do a Thing to Stop Me.
Oh, I love that song.
Days can be lonely, nights dreams come true, making love with somebody exactly like you. And you can't do a thing to stop me. No, you can't do a thing to stop me.
Which is an incredible song. And the thing about that song, I got to tell you, I saw them do that song at a club in Oakland called the Omni. This was before they had recorded it.
Okay.
And the live version of that song that I saw was unbelievable, and it was way better than the recorded version.
Oh, wow.
And I actually had a tape of it. And this is what's horrible. I love that song so much, and I'm listening to it in my car like all the time, over and over again. And my tape deck got stolen out of my car, and the tape was in it.
Oh.
And the person who stole it could care less about that.
Yeah.
But that was the end of that.
Oh,
And sadly, I have not been able to find any bootlegs from back then, with that song on it. Even though I have a lot of Chris Isaak bootlegs, I don't have. I couldn't find any with that song. So yeah, but that was the last song that Jimmy played on, according to Eric Jacobson.
Oh wow, okay, that is my favorite song off that album. I love that song.
Yeah, it's a great song. Yeah, yeah.
At this point, Jimmy, has he been into the hard drugs at this point? Because I know he had gotten into some pretty nasty stuff. Is that what caused him to leave halfway through, I guess, San Francisco Days?
Well, what happened was Jimmy had actually, when he was in high school, he started drinking and of course smoking weed, but also using speed on occasion.
Okay.
And some other drugs as well that a nurse friend of his would get from this hospital.
Right.
Some pretty hardcore stuff, actually.
Really?
Then when he was in San Francisco, at first he was using, he was smoking weed, and I think he was drinking at that point to some degree, but he was also, there was a lot of speed going around, and he was definitely participating in that. I mean, he wasn't addicted to speed. He wasn't but he was definitely using it. But he was the thing was, at that point, he was pretty anti-heroin. But what happened was around 1985, and this is when he's in the Chris Isaak band, there was a lot of Persian brown heroin that came into San Francisco through these Iranian guys. And you could smoke Persian brown heroin.
Okay.
It's called chasing the dragon. And basically you have a piece of tinfoil and you put it on the tinfoil. You have a lighter, underneath it, and you basically roll tinfoil around a straw and then get the straw out. And so then you use the straw to, as the smoke comes up off of the tinfoil, from the lighter, you breathe in the smoke, and that's how you get high.
Okay.
And so that's what Chasing the Dragon is. And so Jimmy started doing that in late 84, 85.
Wow.
And he later told a friend that he felt like he'd come home the first time he used heroin.
Oh,
that
wow.
It was like such an overwhelming positive experience for him that he basically never stopped after that.
Oh my gosh.
And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I kind of get into it in the book. I definitely deal with the whole issue of addiction and why some people become addicted in the course of the book,
Right.
because I thought that was really important. It's not just, you use heroin a bunch of times and suddenly you're addicted. I mean, there's other factors that are involved. But anyway, the thing was, it wasn't like he went from 0 to 100. It wasn't like that. I mean, he was, and actually people are able to, I was surprised at this, but actually I shouldn't have been, because people can use heroin for decades, and some people can use it and not have to, they can sort of maintain, and they can maintain their jobs, and they can manage to do all kinds of things for extended periods of time. And so Jimmy was kind of into it, but not to where it was getting in the way of anything, as far as I know, at that particular point in time.
Okay.
But as time went on, he was using it more. There was a point where he wasn't smoking it, he was shooting it.
Wow.
And he got to a point, and then what happened was, the thing was, okay, so he's going along, and I think he had all kinds of expectations of what would happen if they had a hit. And I think these expectations were way out of line with the reality of something like that.
Okay.
And so when Wicked Game happened, I mean, he said to me, like, Wicked Game became a hit in England first before it was a hit here.
Okay.
And Jimmy said to me, we have a hit, but I don't feel any different. And nobody knows we have a hit. I have to tell them that we have this hit. And he said that, and that it's like, that's a drag. You got to tell someone that you're like famous in England. I mean,
trust me, I'm famous.
And so he felt like he should have gotten more credit than he got for that song.
Okay.
And the thing is, I mean, Chris Isaak told me that Jimmy really deserved a lot of credit, that Jimmy was very responsible for that song becoming a hit.
Yeah.
I mean, Isaak himself said that. And so the thing is, when before Wicked Game became a hit, sometime in 1990, he got a relationship going with a movie star or actress named Jennifer Rubin.
Okay.
Jennifer Rubin was, she was in the horror movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street, #3, third one. And she had a brief part as Edie Sedgwick in Oliver Stone's The Doors. And she was in other movies and other TV things. And she had been a model before that. So she was on the cover of Mirabella magazine and other magazines. So anyway, she got introduced to Jimmy, and they just like, I mean, they clicked. I mean, that night they clicked.
Yeah.
And so he has this actress girlfriend, but he's happy about that they're playing, to all these big crowds. And he's happy that they have this hit that's on the radio and they do the Tonight Show and, all this stuff. And he's got this great girlfriend and all this.
Yeah.
But he's not happy about his situation with Chris Isaak. He feels like he should have more credit. He feels like he should have more money. And he just doesn't feel, it doesn't feel different to him in some ways. And so at a certain point, because of things that were going on in Jennifer Rubin's professional life and this stuff that was going on in Jimmy's life, Jennifer Rubin just couldn't deal with the scene anymore, and she broke up with Jimmy.
Oh, okay.
And that hit him really hard. And I think she says she doesn't think that he was doing heroin while they were together, but I think he probably was. And, he was, there's ways to do it. There was times when they weren't together and but anyway, so his heroin use accelerated. And then after the breakup, it really accelerated, and to the point where he would show up for rehearsals and he couldn't play his parts.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, he was messed up. And at a certain point, now Eric Jacobson, the producer, co-manager, he doesn't remember. He says he can't remember if Jimmy just quit or if Chris fired him.
Right.
But some other people said that Jimmy was fired.
Yeah.
And I think that's what would have happened. That makes sense. But the thing was, Jimmy also, he was sick and tired of working with Chris Isaak. I mean, he told me that. I mean, he, and he was not happy with some of the stuff that was getting recorded for the fourth album. And so anyway, I think that he was fired, but he might have quit if he hadn't been fired.
Okay.
It's possible that could have happened. I don't know. And so then he just went into a terrible drug thing and was just really, really messed up on heroin. And he would hole up in his apartment for weeks, basically.
Oh,
like
wow.
he'd be in there until he ran out of money and ran out of drugs. And then he would leave and go to the bank, which was across the street, and get more money out. Because at that point, there was royalties that were coming in. So he had money.
Yeah.
He wasn't paying taxes on the money, which came later. I mean, it was a point where he owed over $100,000 in back taxes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's kind of what happened, And then he was basically using heroin for the rest of his life. But he did. But even with that going on, in 2007, he recorded this amazing solo album.
Yes.
Called El Dorado, which is an amazing album. And he did it all in his dining room, sitting at his computer. I mean,
wow.
I mean, it's, yeah.
In the interim between, 1993 San Francisco days and 2007, what was he doing? I mean, was he?
Well, first he was, I mean, he had this whole horrible drug thing going on. And then at a certain point, he got into some kind of trouble. Like I think he owed people money in San Francisco. And he called up this girl he knew in LA, and it was like, hey, I got to get out of here now. And she said, okay, fly down. You can stay at my place. He got on a plane that night, flew down. She picked him up, brought him to her place. They didn't tell anyone that he was there.
Oh, wow.
And he got clean. She said he got clean for a while.
Okay.
while they were together. And then they got into a relationship. And so she was his girlfriend for a while, but then he started using again.
Oh,
And so to the point where she had to tell him to leave. And so then in the earlier part of 1998, he went and moved in with his brother, and his brother was supposedly was helping him clean up. And then he met this woman named Winter, and he moved in with her. She had this big loft. He moved in with her, and eventually they got married. In 2003, they got married. They had a kid, Waylon, at the end of 2003.
Okay.
But also in 1998, by July of 98, he formed an instrumental band called the Mysteries, and they played around L.A.
Oh, cool.
I mean, I had a reporter working for me who did a story on the Mysteries,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
online. You can find it if you search MTV and the Mysteries, you'll find this story.
Oh, cool.
And,
Okay.
And find two of them actually. But anyway, so he did the Mysteries. Then 2003, married. He has Waylon. Meanwhile, in 2002, he got a job doing IT at a big Hollywood marketing company. It's a company that does. He always had this computer thing going on.
Okay.
This is another side of him. I mean, he was a consultant for Apple Computers back in the late 80s.
Oh,
And-
wow.
Yeah, and there's actually a video online you can see where that's a whole thing about Apple Computers and music, and Jimmy has a whole section in it. It's got like 5 artists, and he's one of the artists or 6 artists.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so he was like, running this IT department for this place and had a responsible job. And
Wow.
somehow he was managing to keep that going at the same time that he's using heroin, because he had this like terrible thing in 2000, I think it was 2002, where he almost OD'd, and this friend of his had to like help him and get him to a place where they gave him this stuff that basically dealt with his withdrawal symptoms. And so it was like, yeah, he was somehow maintaining, but he worked this job through the recording of El Dorado. He worked this job, and then he got fired in the beginning of 2008. And that was also a time when his girlfriend had broken up with him because of the heroin use. And so, I mean, yeah, it was just this roller coaster ride thing going on.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
I know. It's just terrible how this played out.
Now, El Dorado, you mentioned, it's an incredible album. I love that album so much. But I mean, he's got a SoundCloud page, and he's got some other tracks that like, all right, so this song Priscilla by Heather Saval,
still standing. I wondered if you would ever turn around. Cold, misty evening.
He's got Tell Me, let's see, Strawberry Jam, The Gasser, Ravioli, all these really cool tracks. Has there ever been an attempt to consolidate all these loose tracks?
As far as I know, no one has done that so far, And the thing is, I mean, it would have to be a record company that was kind of doing it because they really just because they dug Jimmy, because El Dorado, they didn't sell a lot of copies of El Dorado.
Yeah. And
they didn't think they were going to sell a lot of copies of it. I mean, Lakeshore is a movie company, and they basically signed Jimmy because they thought his music they could use his music in films. And there was a point where they were looking for great artists that could make music that would work for their films.
Oh, okay.
And so Jimmy fit that bill. And so they could do the CD, but they told him up front, we're not going to promote this thing. We're not going to give you tour support or anything like that.
Yeah.
We can't do that. We're not that kind of company. And Jimmy was fine with that, or who knows what Jimmy thought, because, Jimmy, there was a point where sort of, I think Jimmy was kind of disconnected a little bit from the reality of things. And so maybe he just, he thought, well, this is going to revive my career. This is going to, I don't know. But, periodically, what's really sad is, Jimmy he could have been an incredible session musician too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But for some reason, it just didn't work out. There was one point where he did some stuff for Billy Idol, but that stuff never made it onto a record.
Oh, wow.
And then Lana Del Rey contacted him, and she gave him this song of hers, and it was just her voice singing, and Jimmy recorded guitar against that, and it's so beautiful.
Oh,
wow. And I have 3 versions of it, and each one of them is really great. One of them is just even it goes to another level.
Oh, wow.
But she ended up taking the song in a completely different direction, and basically what Jimmy had friends say, Jimmy was really excited when that happened and when he was working on that stuff.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he's not getting any calls anymore.
God.
And if she had used his stuff, things might have turned out a lot different. But you don't know. Because Jimmy would also, when things were going really good, that can also be a time when someone who's an addict really gets heavy into the stuff because they can't deal with the pressure.
Yeah. And now they have the funds to fund their habit. So.
Yes, they have that, but yeah.
We did kind of gloss over the Chris Isaak years a bit for several reasons. It's a huge part, but it's also a big part of the book, and I want people to read the book and not just listen to the podcast and forget about the book. So,
right.
But one of the things, and I reached out to several people that I know are big fans of Jimmy's. One of the questions they all wanted to know was if Jimmy and Chris stayed in touch at all after he left Silvertone or was fired from Silvertone. And if I'm assuming it was not the best split. So I was wondering if they ever kind of reconciled and were on speaking terms afterwards.
Well, he was out of the band in 1992. Okay. And then after he was out of the band, at a certain point, Chris was worried about Jimmy. And so this is what I was told.
Okay.
That he was, I was told this by Michael Zagaris, who was a photographer who started photographing Silvertone back in 82.
Oh, cool.
And became kind of friends with both Jimmy and Chris. And Zagaris, he photographs the 49ers and the Giants.
Oh,
and
okay,
so he would bring them to games. And
nice.
Yeah. So they became friends. And anyway, Zagaris and Chris went to Jimmy's apartment, and they knocked on the door. There's no answer. They're calling. Zagaris looks through the mail slot, and he said it looked like a disaster area in there. It was just horrible. And finally, they just sort of hear Jimmy faintly saying, "Just leave. Leave me alone. Leave. I don't want to see any." Something to that effect. And Chris says to Zagaris, "Well, isn't there something we can do?" And Zagaris says, "There's nothing." And Chris says, "There's got to be something." And then Chris basically says, "Well, look, what are you going to do? First, you're going to get him to rehab. Then are you going to pay for him to be in rehab at one of these places for a month? And then after he gets out, then what, I mean, you can't, it's just, you can't do this. I mean, and so then Jimmy actually, over the next couple of years, I mean, he went into, methadone programs a couple of times, but failed to, didn't succeed with those. Or if he did, then he, fell back and backslided. But then when he went down to LA, and when he was living with this woman and kind of cleaned up, she told me that there was a day when the two of them went to Capitol Records studio where Chris was doing some recording and hung out with him a bit. And that things were, Amy, were friendly. Yeah. And then as far what I understand is they then didn't see each other again until I think it's 1999. Yeah, it was October of 99. Isaak was playing a free concert at the Staples Center, and which was basically 11 blocks from where Jimmy was living in this loft that his girlfriend had. Oh, wow. And yeah, and this is in downtown LA. Okay. Is where the loft is. And so so after the show, Chris Isaak and Raleigh, the bass player, and some other friends showed up at the loft, and there was kind of a party kind of going on. Oh, nice. And it was, I mean, I was told it was tense between Jimmy and Chris when when they first showed up. Then one of the women who was with Chris started telling some jokes and doing some kind of funny things, and and that kind of broke the ice. And also Jimmy was really glad to see Raleigh. Because I guess they had been pretty good friends, but a lot of people were smoking in the loft, and Chris hates cigarette smoke. Chris Isaak does not want to be around cigarette smoke because of his voice. And so that was kind of a problem. And so after a while, he left. I mean, it wasn't like it was a great reunion or anything. It was it was just sort of it's okay, but it wasn't like it wasn't like they were okay, now we're going to work together again or anything. Yeah. And the thing was, his girlfriend was really encouraging him to work with Chris again and to see them. I mean, she said, look, they want to hang out with you, why don't you call them? But he just didn't want to do it. And then at a certain point, the guy who lived right next door to them in the loft was this guy, Bill Sankey. He's a bass player, but he's also a producer, and he had a recording studio in the loft next door. Okay. And he became really close with Jimmy. They were like best friends for a while, and they hung out every day. And so at one point he said to Jimmy, he said, look, man, it's like Chris Isaak just keeps on going and going, and these guys, the guys in his band, they're not stars. They're not getting the big credit and everything, but they're, touring the world, and they're playing in the band, and they're playing for people, and they're making money. And it's not like the worst thing in the world, but he just didn't want to hear it. And and so Bill just said, I never brought it up again, because it was really clear that was just, he didn't want to talk about it, and he wasn't going to do it. Now, years later, in 2016, Jimmy briefly moved back up to the Bay Area, moved in with a girlfriend up there. Okay. And at that point, he was invited to come, because Chris Isaak and the band were going to play at the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival. That's a yearly free huge concert in Golden Gate Park. Oh, cool. It's a major thing. And it's not just bluegrass. I mean, that's why it's Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, because I mean, everyone plays there, from, Jorma Kaukowen of the Jefferson Airplane and that band Hot Tuna, to, just all kinds of big stars, Emmylou Harris and all kinds of people play the thing. And so anyway, Isaak was going to play that year, and they asked him if he would come and sit in, but it didn't happen. He didn't end up doing it. And I have Raleigh told me about that. I have no idea. He doesn't know why Jimmy didn't do it. It just didn't happen. So, yeah, I mean,
so many missed opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and Chris Isaak said at one point that he would like to work with Jimmy again, but yeah, like I say, it never happened.
It's so heartbreaking because he ended up homeless.
Yeah, and the thing was, he didn't have to be homeless. I mean, he had money, but he was so messed up that, yeah, it was just. I mean, as I understand it, he didn't have to be. I mean,
right. At what point? I mean, it sounds like he just at the end almost gave up on music. Was there a point where he just kind of stopped recording and turned his back, or on playing guitar? Were the drugs too much at that point?
Well, he didn't really stop. I mean, he, after his solo album, he kept working on stuff, and he, and there's all that stuff that's up, that you saw up on, online.
Yeah, on the SoundCloud page. Page.
Yeah. And he got into this thing where what he told several people was he was making these really short instrumental pieces, and they weren't just like the stuff he did on El Dorado. They were different. And so I think there's one or two really short things that are on SoundCloud. Yeah. Maybe that's along the line of what he was doing, but he kept working. And when he was interviewed by this guy who did the last interview with him, and that happened in like July of 2018. And while he had his little studio set up, there was in a bedroom of the house where he was living. Yeah. And half the room, they're like he had a single bed over on one side of the room, and he had his Mac and his keyboards and synthesizers and all that stuff. And all during the interview, he had this guitar that he was trying to fix. There was something wrong with the pickup, and he was trying to like reattach the pickup, and but he was messed up, and so he never was able to do that during this 3-hour interview. But the point is that he was still doing stuff or trying to do stuff. That was 6 months before he died.
Okay.
Now obviously at a certain point when they left the house, there was an eviction notice, and they hung around for a while, but then they left the house. And at that point, first he was like sleeping in his car. And so I'm not sure what happened with the stuff that was in the house, the computer and now maybe he put that in storage or something.
Yeah.
Because most of his stuff went to Arizona, where his sisters and other family members live. Back in late 2016, he had brought all the stuff up to the Bay Area, and then his girlfriend at a certain point, because of the drugs, said, "You got to go. You're gone, man." Yeah. And so at that point, all that stuff went up to Arizona.
Okay. And
then, so when he went back to LA, he brought a computer and a guitar or two, but stuff that could fit in a car, I guess. And so he didn't have a lot in LA.
Okay.
At the point when he was homeless.
Oh, it's just such. It's a fascinating but heartbreaking story.
It's tragic. It's tragic. And I mean, I've lived with it for 3 years, every day for more than 3 years, actually, at this point, for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And so, you become a little bit kind of used to it or something. I guess is the only way I can put it, but not really.
Right.
But it's different than when I first heard about it. I just about fell over.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, and it's just terrible. It's absolutely terrible what happened, how his life ended. It's just a horrible thing, and but I've tried in this book, I really tried to emphasize both or explain why Jimmy was important and what was special about his playing and the unique contributions he made. And because I had interviewed my Jimmy myself for, over 4 hours when he was in his prime, when he wasn't messed up.
Right.
And then I also had this final 3-hour interview that he did at the end of his life. So I had 7 hours of Jimmy talking. And then I also had over 10 hours of Chris Isaak talking. And then I interviewed more than 60 people over the 3 years. And a lot of those were like very extensive interviews. There were some people like Eric Jacobson, for example, that I went back to throughout the whole 3 years. I mean, as new questions would come up, I'd go back to Eric and ask him about this or about that. And so, so this was very deeply reported. And also Jimmy is in the book in a big way himself, because Jimmy himself talks throughout the book. And he talks a lot about how many of the songs on the first album, like how they were recorded or how he came up with his guitar parts. And so, I mean, for a guitar player, I think that would be particularly interesting.
Oh, for sure.
I was fascinated by all of that. And, and I'm not I'm not a musician. I mean, I mess around a little bit, but I'm not a musician. But I just felt it was really important to get all that in the book and to just show Jimmy both at his best and then kind of what happened. Yeah. And it's also, I would hope that maybe some musicians, who would read this, some young musicians, maybe they wouldn't try, go down the drug, thing. Yeah. By seeing what happened to Jimmy. Yeah.
A supremely talented guitarist who just lost it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, he should have made so much more music. There should be so many more albums. Yeah. With Jimmy playing on them than there are. And it's a really sad thing that that's not the case.
Yeah. I mean, he could take a song like Sleepwalk and make a song that everybody knows sound like a Jimmy Wilsey song. That's really, really, really beautiful. And then also the Carpenter song, which wasn't actually written by the Carpenters, but they made it famous, Superstar. Yes. His version of that is just beautiful, incredibly beautiful. And he had a tone and he had a feel. Yes. I mean, that was so special. And the thing is, it wasn't like, and Jimmy, he wasn't a flashy player at all. No. He was the opposite of that. But his playing, it was just so beautiful. And then there were times when it was, on a bunch of the Chris Isaak songs where it's very sort of dark, or it's very, very powerful, very, like on
You Owe Me Some Kind of Love, which is a song off of the second Chris Isaak album.
Yeah.
I mean, his guitar just makes that song.
You owe me some kind of love. You owe me some kind of love.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it's so incredible.
There's a reason David Lynch loved these guys.
You know, yeah, for sure. And so I really tried to get that into the book, and to talk, just to try to convey that, there was just this special kind of a special thing that he had, that it was there. It's not like you could go, well, that's it, or that's it.
Right.
It was a sort of ephemeral thing, but that just made his playing so special.
There's just, like you said, there's just a feel, an aura about the way he played music, the way he played that guitar, and you can't teach it. It's just something that he's got.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like he took all this stuff that he'd listened to, but he turned it into something unique.
Yeah.
That wasn't just it wasn't like he was copying what he heard. It was like he took it and then he put his own spin on it.
Yeah. Like the song Strawberry Jam, it's definitely to me, but it's got like a Stonesy feel to it. I really like that track. And the album, I'm so used to talking to people about albums. When is the book coming out? And I know that we were discussing that some of the proceeds are going to help out Jimmy's son, Waylon.
Yeah. When Jimmy died, his son was 15 years old.
Wow.
I think he was just turning 16 that year. Is that right? Anyway. And so one of his relatives became his guardian, and he left Los Angeles and went to live with them in Arizona.
Okay.
And I mean, he turned 18 this past December, but he's still, I mean, as far as I know, he's still been living with the relative and preparing to go to college. But he's a very good student. And I felt when I began working on this book, right from the start, I decided that I wanted to give a portion of my royalties to Waylon. I just felt like I had to do that. It was just, I couldn't do this otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I'm giving him 25% of whatever I get. And it's not like I'm not deducting expenses or anything like that. Basically, if I earn $1, he gets 25 cents of every single dollar that is, going to be paid to me by the book company.
That's so wonderful. That is so generous.
And so, well, I don't know. I mean, I just, whatever, I just felt like it was the right thing to do. And, and it's not like, I mean, I've made that public because I want people to know that some of their money is going to go to Waylon. And the thing is, if the best place to buy the book is directly from the book company's website, and the company is called Hozak Records and Books. And this company, it's started out as like a punk record label in Chicago, and they started putting out records. They 15 years ago they started putting cool records out.
Okay.
And the guy who founded it loves music. He's as obsessive about music as I am, and as I'm sure you are.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's awesome.
I mean, that's his thing is music. And then he started the book division some years ago. And so this is a really cool indie operation there is nothing corporate about this book company. And I mean, my contract is less than 1 page.
Oh, wow.
Now, and it's not microscopic type.
Right.
I mean, okay. And I'll tell you something. With most book companies, it's like a 15-page contract, and it is microscopic type. I mean, and it gets into, it's unbelievable what like book contracts are like.
Oh,
but
gosh.
but this one is as simple as it could be, and it was cool. That was the deal. This guy is just a great guy who
that's awesome.
Started this company. So anyway, he's going to give a small percentage of what he gets to Waylon as well.
Oh,
so,
wonderful.
And so when somebody buys the thing is, when you buy the book directly from the book company does not have to give half of the money to a bookstore, or probably more than half the money to Amazon.
Right. Yeah.
See, and so therefore, my percentage is bigger. Waylon's percentage is bigger.
Yeah.
What the guy who has this indie company who wants to put out more cool books and records, he gets, so it's a really good thing all the way around, and you get the book for what it's supposed to sell for,
Yeah.
So anyway, we're really encouraging people to buy the book from the website. And in fact, I think he's going to wait a bit before you can get the book elsewhere. So it's like to encourage people to get it from the website, you know, and I thought that was a cool idea. I liked it. He has a really different approach to everything than
awesome.
most people, and he's been around 15 years, so it's working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So what's the website, and how can people follow you on social media and keep track of what you're doing and help Waylon?
Okay. Well, the website is Hozac, HOZAC records.com.
Okay.
And all you got to do is put Hozac Records in, and it'll come up. Hopefully you can put a link somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they just Google Hozac Records, go to the website, they'll, right now the book is really prominently displayed there. So they can get a preview of the book. I mean, the book is 414 pages. There are over 150 images, which include photographs and reproduced flyers. There's some of the best photographers from San Francisco, and in fact, some of the best photographers in the country have contributed photographs to this book.
Oh, excellent.
And that includes, there's a couple of photographs from Bruce Conner, the avant-garde artist.
Oh, cool.
There's the late Bruce Conner.
Yeah.
There's great photographs from Ruby Ray, who's a fantastic photographer who was there in the heyday of San Francisco punk, and who's had a couple of books of her photos out. She was just and is an incredible photographer. Michael Zagaris, who I spoke to you about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
he had an amazing, huge coffee table book of his rock photos that came out. He contributed a bunch of photographs.
Oh,
Chester
awesome.
Simpson, Hugh Brown, Sue Brisk. Yes, some great photos by Sue Brisk. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of great stuff. I hope I haven't. Oh, there's a photograph of Jimmy that Chris Stein, from Blondie took.
Yeah.
I have some photographs because I'm also a photographer, and I shot the Avengers at the Mabue Gardens in '78, and
Awesome.
I have a great photo of Jimmy that I took at the Santa Cruz beach when we went there one day, and then there's other stuff, in there. Some photos of other, like a photo I took of the punk band Crime, and a photo I took of Iggy Pop, because Jimmy was a huge Iggy Pop fan.
Yes, I remember that one. Yeah.
A photo I took of Patti Smith. He was a huge. In fact, the Patti Smith group was what made him feel like he could actually do it. Because he heard them play, and he loved it, and he thought, and you know what, I could do that. I can't do what Jeff Beck does, but I could do what they're doing. So
the king of slow.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, people can, that's how they can get to the website. If they want to keep up with me, I have a blog called Days of the Crazy Wild. And if you blog Days of the Crazy Wild, it'll pop up.
Oh,
and
cool.
and I'm whenever something happens relating to the Wilsey book or another book I have coming out at the end of the year, I put the information up there. And I also have a Days of the Crazy Wild Facebook page, but I also have a Michael Goldberg Facebook page.
Okay.
And and whatever's going on, I put on there if there's anything new to report or
Wonderful.
whatever. So
this is as close as I could ever get to getting Jimmy on the podcast. So, man, thank you so much. I really have enjoyed reading the book, and like you mentioned, there's so many amazing images of of him as a kid. It's just a really amazing collection.
It's really, there's one. It's really funny. When he was in high school, he played on the football team.
Yeah.
For 1 year. He was like the shortest player on the team. So in his high school yearbook, there was a picture. There's like the guy who was the tallest player, and there's Jimmy.
Yeah.
This guy is almost twice as tall as Jimmy. I mean, it's really funny picture.
I remember that one. It made me laugh so much. Well, thank you so much for all the time.
Cool.